Welcome to this webinar on how data sharing negotiations work in practice. My name is Daniel Sompolski, and I have been in charge of data sharing in ECHA since 2010. I have invited two of my colleagues to make a role play that will show you an example of how data sharing negotiations may take place. It tries to cover the most common aspect of data sharing negotiation, with practical tips on the rights and roles you have as potential and existing registrants. As you may already know, companies that have the same substance must prepare the registration dossier jointly. A group of such companies is called a Substance Information Exchange Forum, or known by acronym SIEF. Each SIEF covers one substance. Make sure that you discuss substance sameness before you kick off data sharing. This way, you make sure that you spend your time and money on the right substance from the start. In this roleplay, a potential new registrant approaches a lead registrant who agreed with other member registrants to represent them in data sharing negotiations. Both parties have already discussed their substance sameness, and they have concluded that their substance is the same and can now continue with sharing data and cost. The new SIEF member has questions about different aspects of joining an existing registration. The role of the lead registrant representing all members of the joint submission is played by Laura Valin. Alexis Quintana Sainz plays the role of the potential new registrant. Be aware that although all the scenes are based on real cases or situations, the costs mentioned are made up and issues discussed have been simplified. This roleplay is meant to illustrate that both parties, the potential and the existing registrant, have to make every effort in the negotiation to reach a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory agreement.
I manufacture my substance in the range of 10 to 100 tons per year. I have the physicochemical data, but I don't have all the other endpoints. I would like to know the price of the letter of access.
Okay, so normally a registration between 10 and 100 tons per year requires you to have information on 35 endpoints. You mentioned that you have the physicochemical studies, and that covers 14 endpoints. So I understand that you are missing the ecotoxicological, toxicological, and the fate and behavior studies. Is that correct?
Yes. I have all the required physicochemical data, and I would need all the rest.
For those pieces of information, the price of the letter of access would be 10,000 euros. So, and then, of course, for all the data that you already have, you would need to opt out in the submission phase.
First of all, you need to know what REACH requires from you for your registration. The REACH information requirements depend on the tonnage and uses of your substance. The standard information requirements are those which are required as a minimum. If your substance is an intermediate, you only need to provide any information which is available to you. For example, if you manufacture or import 1 to 10 tons of the substance per year, you need to provide information on 22 endpoints. A simplified table listing those endpoints is available on ECHA website. If you manufacture or import 10 to 100 tons of the substance per year, you need to provide an additional 13 endpoints. A list of these endpoints can also be found on ECHA website. Once you know what is required from you, make a comparison with what you already have. You don't have to purchase all the data if you already own some of them. You can negotiate access to individual studies or to all the data that was already submitted. However, you should assess the adequacy and reliability and decide on the selection of the most appropriate information. Finally, you must share data from tests performed on vertebrate animals. This helps to avoid unnecessary duplication of studies that involve animals. For both vertebrate and non-vertebrate data, you must make every effort to share them in a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory way. And remember, the more studies you share, the less registration will cost for everyone in the SIEF.
Thank you for giving me the price of the letter of access. What exactly am I paying for?
Well, the price includes the cost of the studies for the 21 endpoints that you need for your registration, and also the administrative work that the SIEF has done in the past to get this information.
Could you provide me with a breakdown of all the costs?
Yes, of course, we can provide you access to them, but you would need to pay a fee for this.
Really? I don't think I'm supposed to pay any fee for this kind of information.
You are entitled to receive access to documents explaining how the costs have been calculated, and you don't have to pay any additional fees for that. There are also no other preconditions for getting it. For example, you cannot be forced to pay a deposit.
Okay, here's a sheet where you can see how the costs were split between different items.
Thank you. I am wondering how the study costs have been calculated.
Well, whenever we had the invoices available, we used those, of course, as a basis for the costs. If we didn't, on the other hand, then we tried to estimate how much the study would cost if we would conduct it now again.
Thank you for the clarification. I agree with the calculation of the study costs, but how did you calculate the administrative costs? Could you be more specific?
Well, this was agreed among the members of the SIEFs. So basically they include the costs of the consultant who helped us with the invoicing and payments for the SIEF, and they also include the costs for the expert services on the scientific aspects of the dossier.
Okay, can you link the cost of expert services to the specific studies I need? The cost of studies should not be generic, but there should be a link between the expert service and the particular piece of information I need. As I don't need access to all the studies of your whole dossier, it seems reasonable for me not to participate only on the cost of expert service for the studies I am interested in.
Okay, yeah, indeed, I see your point. You're actually the first one who doesn't want to buy the full package, so I think we will need to rediscuss and make a new calculation. That will take some time though, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for your flexibility. As long as I manage to register by 2018, I can wait for the new proposal.
The sharing of cost needs to be fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory. To be able to assess if this is the case, you need information on the individual items that make up the price. Usually, this cost breakdown should list the cost related to data and the cost related to administrative work. It should show the price in relation to the information you require for your registration. No matter what the costs are called or how they are allocated, it is important that they are recorded transparently. Normally, the cost breakdown should justify the cost so that further questions are not necessary. Nevertheless, if you have doubts, you have the right to ask for more information.
So from your cost breakdown, I can also see that you applied an interest rate to the overall cost of the letter of access. Can you please explain the reason for that?
Well, we invested money already in 2010 and pre-financed the dossier. And you are joining only now and have really an advantage because you pay the expense later, while we couldn't use the money from 2010 onwards. So we concluded that it would be fair to get compensated for having made this investment really earlier.
Okay, I don't really agree with you. The REACH regulation is clear that my registration deadline is 2018 and yours was 2010. And the interest rate you apply looks like an early bird incentive. Well, this approach would discriminate against me, even though I am registering according to the timelines set by the regulation.
Yeah, you might be right. I will go back to the group and recommend that we will remove the interest rate from the calculation.
Okay. I also see that a risk premium has been applied to all the studies. Can you please explain me why?
Yes, the risk premium covers the risks taken by us for performing the tests without knowing their outcome.
Okay, I understand from your list of studies that only some of the studies were performed within the SIEF. The majority of them were purchased from third parties with a known result. So I don't find the risk premium appropriate in such cases. Can you make an objective justification for the risk premium separately for each study performed within the SIEF?
Well, we had a very general approach to the risk premium and we just applied the rate commonly used in our sector.
Okay. Well, I would be interested in obtaining precise information about the studies that were generated by the SIEF and information on the risk that could be reasonably expected. In general, I don't see a justification for the automatic application of a risk premium. I think that wherever a risk premium rate is applied, it should be within the realm of reality. So I would ask that you revise the documentation and maybe provide more precise information on the risk premium. Whenever it's not applicable, or it should be removed from the quotation.
I think there are a couple of cases where we can justify applying a risk premium. I will come back to you once I have more information.
Okay. And I understand that your letter of access gives me the right to refer to studies, but not co-ownership rights. So this right to refer is also limited to the EU territory for REACH purposes. Are you applying any kind of discount for the final study costs?
Yes, it has actually been already accounted for. So for the right to refer limitation, you get a 50% discount. And for the fact that it's only applied in the EU territory, you get a 10% discount. And the discount is smaller in this case because we consider that the market for this substance is actually mostly within the EU territory.
Okay.
The examples you have just seen don't mean that any cost elements are admissible or inadmissible. The examples aim to illustrate that both parties have to make every effort to find an agreement on the cost of the data and on the mechanism to share them that is fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory. This may involve asking and replying to detailed questions to make the negotiations progress. There are several models on how to determine the value of data for each purposes. The basis is always the cost of data. The increases and reductions applied to that cost need to be agreed between the co-registrants. Less rights normally imply that the share of cost to be paid is lower. ECHA has published a fact sheet on the typical cost elements in the data sharing negotiation. This fact sheet gives an overview of potential cost elements in the data sharing negotiation, allowing you to better assess whether your data sharing is fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory.
I can also see that there are some costs for the joint submission.
Yes, since we have the same substance, we all are required to submit one registration dossier to ECHA, which technically means that we had to create a joint submission object in REACH-IT already in 2010. You will become a member of this joint submission even if you opt out for some of the data because you have your own studies. To get into the joint submission, you will receive a token from us. And preparing all this has generated costs and therefore we expect you to participate in them.
What are those costs and how are they shared?
Well, first there is the cost of communication between us, making sure that we have all the communication mechanisms in place and that they are working. Secondly, we had to agree who will be the lead registrant. And finally, there is the cost for the technical consultant who helped us with the creation of the joint submission object in REACH-IT, and also with the token distribution and the dossier submission. And we think that those costs should be shared equally.
Well, I don't think that all those costs should be shared equally, but rather proportionally. I agree to the one-off cost for the creation of the joint submission object to be shared equally, as everyone benefits from it in the same way. But I think that the overall management cost should rather be related to the tonnage band, as I needed to submit my dossier for the 2018 deadline, not the 2010.
Apart from a data sharing obligation, you also have a joint submission obligation. The joint submission obligation means that you all have to submit your dossiers to ECHA as part of one submission, even if you have some or all data by yourself and wish to submit it separately as an opt-out. In practice, the cost linked to the joint submission itself, creation of the joint submission object and distribution of the token or dossier submission, are small in comparison to the cost of data or other related costs. This is particularly important for registrants of intermediates. For the cost of the management of the joint submission, the tonnage band of the registrant seems to be an appropriate measure for the proportion of the cost to be shared.
What if more registrants join our SIEF? Is there a way for me to get reimbursed for some of the costs?
Yes, there is. We agreed that we will pull all the costs together again after the 2018 registration deadline, and then we will recalculate the cost of access to data based on the number of co-registrants.
So if I understand correctly, the calculated cost of the letter of access comes from your 2010 estimate and has not been recalculated yet. Did you get any new registrants in 2013? And if yes, why didn't you recalculate the costs again?
Well, that's a good point. We did have new co-registrants joining in 2013, but we have not actually recalculated the price yet. We agreed that running a reimbursement scheme would actually be more costly than the small reimbursements that we would be making.
Well, I am an SME and making a single payment of this amount would endanger my business. Maybe it would make sense for you to recalculate the price of the letter of access more often, taking into account payments already received in 2013, for example. When making a new estimate, it would also be good to take into account the potential number of registrants that will be joining in 2018. And what about the possibility of paying in installments?
Well, theoretically it is possible, yes, but we have not yet adopted this practice, so we would need to discuss how to make it work and maybe make an exception for you. However, since you mentioned running the reimbursement scheme on a more frequent basis, we could see that it would work and we could recalculate the price considering the current number of co-registrants.
The individual proportion of the cost depends on how many co-registrants share the data. It makes a significant difference if the costs are shared between 2 or 200 registrants. The number of co-registrants who will finally share the cost may not be clear until the 2018 deadline. There can also be new registrants joining after 2018. A reimbursement scheme will make sure that the costs are equally shared. Each time a new potential registrant buys access to data, the overall cost for each co-registrant will reduce. When and how frequently the price is recalculated needs to be agreed. The starting point could be an annual reimbursement. Having a reimbursement scheme is mandatory, unless you unanimously agree not to have one. In some cases, running a reimbursement scheme may be more costly than the potential reimbursement. If you unanimously agree to not have the reimbursement scheme, you all need to be able to clearly justify the mutual benefits of such a choice to your future co-registrants. Otherwise, the future co-registrant may not agree to this and may require a reimbursement scheme. We hope you found those scenarios helpful and that they will enable you to prepare for your current or upcoming data sharing negotiation. Data sharing is not designed to generate profit for the data owner. It is in place to share the actual cost between all co-registrants, potential registrants and existing registrants who need that data. Last but not least, remember that sharing data from tests performed on vertebrate animals is mandatory. Remember throughout your negotiations the key principle of data sharing negotiations. Co-registrants are obliged to make every effort to reach an agreement on how to share data and its cost in a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory way. There is a lot of support material available on the ECHA website to help you in your data sharing negotiations. It is available in all official languages of the European Union. The best place to start is our 10-step checklist that you will find here. You will also find do's and don'ts for successful negotiations and support material on information requirements. In most cases, you and your co-registrant will manage to reach a voluntary agreement that will satisfy both of you. However, you might also face difficult situations. On ECHA website, there is also a section on what to do if you encounter issues during your negotiations. As a last resort, if you cannot reach an agreement, ECHA can assess your case. The data sharing dispute procedure can be managed without legal support and is free of charge. You will only be asked to submit all of the records of your negotiations. More details on how the dispute mechanism works in practice can be found on ECHA website. Finally, remember that for any questions related to data sharing, you can also reach out to your national REACH help desk or to the ECHA help desk.